Hey guys, this is IX with RolloutReviews, bringing you another BIONICLE review. This time it is set number 8558, Cahdok Gahdok. This set was released in 2002 and contains about 636 pieces.
The Bahrag, queens of the Bohrok, had been dormant in their nest far beneath the island of Matanui for more than 1,000 years, waiting to be called upon by the Great Spirit to fulfill their righteous duty. Unfortunately for the Matoran who lived on the island above, they were awoke prematurely by another, the evil Makuta, who was about to take the game he'd been playing with the island villagers to a whole new level. Now awake, the queens had not been given knowledge of anything beyond their ultimate goal and were completely unaware of the dire circumstances. As far as they were concerned, this was the call they had been waiting for. Cahdok woke one, Gahdok woke another. By chain reaction, one by one, the entire hive flickered to life. Each Bohrok had been administered a krona, forged by the queens themselves, which telepathically linked them to the Bahrag. From within their nest below the surface, Gahdok and Cahdok led the swarms on their mission. No matter the cost, the Bohrok would carry out the will of the Great Spirit and clean it all. For the island must be cleaned, and all obstacles must be removed. The queens are not only impressive swarm commanders, they can also do more than hold their own in a fight. Each one possesses the combined strength of the individual Bohrok breeds: fire, ice, earth, acid, water, and stone. They're also able to create powerful illusions to deter intruders from their nest. Lastly, the Bahrag are symbiotic. Far apart from one another, their powers become weak. The closer they get, the greater their powers become. Side by side, the queens are unmatched, able to generate invincible force fields and channel unstoppable elemental blasts. As a matter of fact, the blue queen is Cahdok and the red queen is Gahdok, which is rather confusing, all things considered, because up until this point we had been taught that everything with the prefix Ga was of the element of water, and therefore blue. That is not remotely the case here. Now, the Bahrag share a number of similarities to the Rahi beasts from 2001. First and foremost, they're almost entirely comprised of LEGO Technic elements. You're also getting two models out of a single set. Furthermore, both models are fundamentally identical to each other, featuring only a handful of differences. Between these two, obviously, one is blue and the other is red. Cahdok has black around the eyes, and Gahdok has dark gray around the eyes. Finally, Cahdok has long, thin antennae made up of pneumatic tubing, and Gahdok has short, club-like antennae made up of these flipper pieces. And that's it. Beyond that, the queens are exactly the same. With that in mind, first we'll take a look at the construction from a purely aesthetic point of view, using Cahdok. Later, we'll highlight the gimmicks and features of the set, primarily using Gahdok. In basic terms, the Bohrok queens are super cool looking dragon things. There's definitely an alien, or at the very least insectoid theme going on here, with the buggy eyes, the antenna, and this earwig-like abdomen towards the back, although most people, myself included, would just consider that a tail. From the side, some would argue they look a bit like chickens, and I don't think that's too far off. Although from dragon to dinosaur to bird, I can see a connection there, so I don't have any problem with it.
We'll take an in-depth look at the build itself, starting from the bottom up. The feet are made using recolored Bohrok shields, which work really well. They make 3 toes on each foot, and I love the way that looks. Towards the back, you have a couple of standard Bohrok feet, which unfortunately leave behind a couple of exposed ball sockets, but nothing too bad. The leg itself is built using these ratchet assemblies, which I absolutely love, if not only because of the sounds they produce. Forward and back, you have this pleasant ratchet at the knee and the ankle. And then left to right, it makes this cacophony of clicks, which is music to my ears. The upper leg is made using Bohrok torso pieces, and the shaping there works really well. Unfortunately, you have this very noticeable white pin axle that shows through. However, white is the only color pin axles appear in this entire set, so it's easily forgiven. On to the belly of the beast. It's made up out of Technic bips and bobs and lift arms and beams, and honestly, it's sort of all over the place. This is the one part of the set aesthetically that I think falls a bit short. You have this gap here, you have this section that sticks out of the bottom, you have some unsightly rubber bands, and then the worst offender is this axle that just sort of sticks out in the middle straight through the body. I suppose all of this is only necessary to facilitate one of the play features, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. That said, it's not nearly as bad as it could have been, I suppose. The arms attach to the body in a simple manner, and they're made up out of standard Bohrok limbs. The hand is built using a slicer hand, the same variety used on Tahu, Pohatu, and Liwa, and it works in a similar way. It sort of locks in place, you can disengage it, there's a ball joint, and you can lock it back into place in a variety of ways. The claws are made up out of Bohrok teeth, and those work really well too. Towards the back, the tail assembly is mostly comprised of Technic beams and lift arms as well. Noticeably this part which forms the rear and leaves things a little bit gappy. But that's not without reason, because this is actually the trigger for the main mechanism. You're meant to hold it something like this, using the tail as a handle, and it's actually fairly comfortable. The tubes on the back create something of a padded grip, and it actually feels really good in the hand. Now the outer tubes here are extremely long and actually extend past this blue piece here at the end of the tail. Keep an eye out on these because they like to misalign themselves depending on how you handle this thing. If you have too much leeway room between the tube and the tail itself, you could accidentally cause some unwanted bending in there. Now, the inner tubes don't have any similar problems, however, from time to time, they can sort of come loose here and reveal a little bit of the axle on the inside. Now obviously the tail comes up and becomes sort of a hump on the back. I actually like this in a way because to me it's always looked like an engine block on the back. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but there's something about that that really works for me with the fan, the piston, and those intakes. Unfortunately, there are a couple of exposed pins towards the top. Nothing but more and more beams fill out the neck, which is a little bit unfortunate because that means there isn't a whole lot in terms of movement. You have these giant gears towards the top, which maybe look a little bit out of place, but on the other hand, they also form sort of spikes or maybe a frill towards the back. Gahdok. Now, my absolute favorite part about this build is the parts usage in the head. I love the way this looks, how the small Technic pieces come together to shape the top and bottom jaw, as well as the toothy maw. The way it's built, you're able to bring down the head, disengaging the two gears, then you can lift up the top jaw before locking them back together, meaning you're able to display the queens with their mouths open, roaring. I love this option. Inside the mouth, you have some white pin axles and axles forming the teeth, and then towards the bottom, you have a white Onua claw, which fits in rather well with the other Technic pieces. Inside, you also have this half pin here, which has a part in one of the play functions, but here it sort of looks like a tongue. Towards the top, you have some white Bohrok eyes forming fangs, as well as some more green Bohrok eyes forming, well, the actual eyes. This nostril piece is also where the antenna mount, and as I mentioned earlier, in Cahdok's case, you have a long, thin variety, which, because of how malleable they are, manage to get out of the way pretty easily, even when you have the mouth open as far as it will go. They find themselves sitting in between these two Technic beams. Switching over to Gahdok, let's take a look at the first play function, which is actually quite complex. First, you want to make sure that the mouth is closed. This won't work properly if it's open. Second, you're going to assume the position we demonstrated earlier, holding the tail as a handle and gripping the trigger. Finally, you're going to pull back, resulting in this. To reset, you push up on the bottom of the head or tilt it back. Now this is a very quick function, so I'm going to demonstrate it a couple more times, just so you can sort of get an idea of exactly what's going on. The neck lunges forward, the mouth opens, and then snaps shut at the last moment. It's very cool. Now there's a couple of things worth keeping in mind when activating this function. First, you want to go about doing it in one quick motion. Any hesitation or slow-moving action can result in it getting stuck or jammed somewhere along the process. And at this point, all that's left to do is reset and try again. However, you can sort of use this to your advantage to either open the mouth without snapping the jaws shut, per se, or jamming it intentionally to pose the queens something like this. Second, you want to keep in mind the direction that the head is moving in relation to this line here. Tilting it down too far and activating the function in full force could result in the bottom of the head slamming into the ground, potentially resulting in some damage to these bottom teeth, and you definitely want to avoid doing that. From this point, I'm going to remove an arm and a leg so that we can discover exactly how this function works. By pulling back on the trigger, it actually swings back this entire assembly, which pulls on this lever and swings the head forward. This rubber band and this rubber band are only there to help reset the mechanism. This one is there for something else entirely. Now, this larger gear here does not move at all. It's actually locked in place, and the smaller gear runs along it to open the jaws. The head itself is very loosely connected, only with a couple of gray pins. The only reason this gear keeps in contact with this one is because of this rubber band and this axle. Now, once you get to this point, you actually run into a bit of resistance, especially on Gahdok with the more rigid antenna. You sort of just have to push through it, and you'll notice a couple of teeth in the gears actually skip, which is unfortunately only necessary. Now, this is the point of no return. This is why the feature requires so much momentum to have it work properly. So the parts in here can push past each other efficiently. As you can see, the top of this beam fits into the back of the head, and the goal is to get it to slide along these rounded bits and drop down, just like that, which is very difficult to demonstrate in slow motion here, but we tried our best. Now at this point, the end of this beam and this beam here have pushed the bottom jaw forward enough that it actually disengages the smaller gear from the larger gear, allowing the rubber band here to snap the jaws shut. It's actually a pretty ingenious mechanism, but there are a couple things about it that I don't really like. First, I'm not fond of the fact that it sort of requires the gears to skip for it to work. It doesn't damage anything, but I just don't like it. Second, when you reset it, it actually causes the gears to lightly grind on each other. Granted, the way it's attached with the rubber band here doesn't actually allow enough friction for that to do any damage either, but it just makes me a little bit uneasy. Now, the second play feature is actually another big reason that this set is very similar to the O1 Rahi. The two models are meant to fight in something of a built-in game. And I'm sorry, but that makes no sense from a story perspective. The two queens would never fight. But that's sort of beside the point. It directly involves this belly piece. That's why it looks so disconnected, and that's why there's this big axle running through the front. You're meant to pull this piece out, which actually requires a bit more effort than you might expect. A fair bit more force than I'd like. But by pulling it out, it removes this white axle, allowing this rubber band to launch the bar up and into the mechanism. This no longer allows the bottom section to swing backward and completely disengages the function. Now, I like this. I like it a lot, conceptually. I think it's super cool that you're able to disengage the function completely. From a story-driven play perspective, it's great that it allows the Toa to actually defeat the Bahrag in a physical manner. Unfortunately, I really don't like how you're meant to go about doing this. Basically, you're supposed to take one of the Bahrag, activate the function, and then use that half pin in the mouth to grab a hold of this piece and yank it out, while the other one tries to do the same. I will not be demonstrating this in full. And that's mainly because the bottom teeth, the Onua claw, is made up of a much softer plastic than the rest. I got this set secondhand, and when I received it, the teeth were pretty beat up. The Onua claw was scratched and frayed and looked pretty gnarly, despite the rest of the set being in really good condition. I've obviously since replaced those parts with shiny new ones from Bricklink. But the reason behind this was because the previous owner played with this set the way they were meant to, pitting the two queens against each other. I cannot believe I'm actually saying this, but from a collector's standpoint, I highly recommend not to play with this set how you are meant to play with it, which is a weird suggestion for a toy, and one I don't like giving, but that's how it is. These teeth aren't really made to support constant smashing and biting and yanking without receiving a considerable amount of damage. For the sake of preserving the condition, I highly advise against doing that. Which is probably my absolute least favorite part about this set. Between these skipping, grinding gears and the fear of wrecking the teeth, I find myself a little bit scared to play with it. Even if I do nothing wrong, there's a chance that something could get damaged. And I hate that feeling. Especially when this is a toy we're talking about. Now, you might not care about any of that. And I'll admit, this is undoubtedly a personal problem, but it's still extremely disappointing. The Bahrag are certainly not perfect, but they're still one of the most popular Bionicle sets by far. Because of this, they often go for a pretty demanding price online. Don't get me wrong though, despite their flaws, I really do think they're worth it. I love this set. Paranoid hesitations aside, the main function is cool, complex, forceful, and gives them a lot of presence. The secondary function is a fantastic idea, and while aesthetically the mechanism looks a little awkward, I suppose functionally it does work well. It's just too bad that the existence of this feature promotes a play scheme that could potentially damage the models. Although, in reality, that's just something for collectors and those looking for the set in perfect condition secondhand to worry about. I'm sure any kid would have a blast playing with it as intended. Remember that it's your toy. You can do whatever you want. Don't let my suggestions hold you back if personally you don't care about scuffing some teeth. All things considered, I have very little problems, and I think they look incredible up on the shelf. Cahdok Gahdok is one of the best sets to come out of 2002, not to mention one of the best Bionicle sets of all time. They're so worth having, if not just to display them alongside your Bohrok swarms, or to recreate the climactic fight against the 6 Toa. If you come across them for a price worth paying, you don't want to pass them up. So, that is about it guys, and this is IX Roll It IX, signing off.